Pretty good question you could ask me is, well, okay, well, why has nobody ever shown me this before? In all the years that you've been learning French, and I know that many of the people who be watching this tuto, many of you will have been studying French for a very long time. I'm talking decades. Some of you might have come to this fairly recently, but lots of people did learn it at school. You might be one of them. You might have learned to evening classes. You might come fresh to it on Duolingo, all sorts of places, I suppose, where you can learn French, and you might not have come across this. And you think, well, okay, so why have I not heard about this before? And that's what I'm going to talk about in this tuto. So, first, I'm going to take an expression, a term from, or quote even, from Jacqueline Picoche, who said, La méthode n'est pas une recette. La méthode n'est pas une recette. And what that means is the method is not a recipe. And what she meant by that was, I can't give you a ready-made method that, if you follow this exactly as I say it and you don't do any thinking on your own behalf, then you will become fluent in French. What I can do is I can show you a methodology and I can show you an approach and I can show you the hidden structure that I can show you how the hidden structure will reveal itself actually to you. But I can't just say to you, do A, B, and C, and then you'll become fluent on X date. And if that's what you're looking for, you're probably going to stop this watching this video straight away, and that's absolutely fine. But if you're prepared to discover this and you want some direction from me to help you to do that, and the reassurance that there really is a hidden structure there and why nobody has shown it to you before, then stay with me and watch the rest of this tuto. So it's a fair question, and I'm just going to come back to Jacqueline Picoche again, and I'm just going to find my book. This is a tome which is her work. I mean, look how big it is. If I put it on my head, I give you a sense of how enormous this piece of work. And it took her 50 years to come up with it. And it's based on a relatively small number of words carry a huge amount of the French language. But she gives this warning, and this is the warning that I've already given you earlier on, is that it's not a recipe. Research does not equal a recipe. And I love this expression. La méthode n'est pas une recette. In other words, there's no list that I can simply give you to memorize and suddenly you'll become fluent. There's no floor plan, as I've talked about building before, that I can give you and you sort of like walk around and, you'll get to that destination. Because what really matters is what I give you and the work that you put in and the discovery that you find. This is a very, very personal experience of learning French. So what really matters is understanding how the words behave inside the structure of the language and how you assimilate them and how you can reuse them. And you discover that structure by taking little steps. It might be 10 minutes each day, each of those steps, and by sort of like really honing down, excluding a lot of the distractions, excluding a lot of the noise, and just honing right down onto one word at a time. One word that I'll show you all of its versatility. I'll show you how all the different places where you can use it. I'll also show you how it actually takes you into grammar as well, and also how to pronounce it, which is very important if you want to give an instant, really good impression to someone. You're making all sorts of judgments, I guess, even whether you're conscious or not of it, about me based on how I'm pronouncing my words in English. So as you start to explore these words that I give you, you'll start to notice how often they appear, how widely they're used, and how many expressions they can generate. And what's really exciting is they'll start to become familiar. In a bit like, I suppose, a bit like, when you sort of like first go visit, let's imagine visiting a French town for the first time, and then you go back to it every year for 20 years, let's say. I'm not saying you're going to be learning with me for 20 years, but what I'm saying is that over time, that town, if you were to keep going back to it, or even if it was 5 years, or, just several occasions on the same year, what you'd find is that each place will become more and more familiar. Distance between places, by the way, seems to shrink, doesn't it? And you've got your sort of like point de repère, as they say in French, which is your bearings, your landmarks and things. And that's what you'll start to find happens with the language as well. And eventually you might just walk along with your head down in that town and not even notice that there's been a change along the way, a shop has changed name or something like that because you're just so clear about how to get from A to B. But I like a little metaphor, and one of the ones that I used previously was the idea of building a building out of starting with the pillars. And this is quite a well used way to talk about grammar. And grammar is quite often talked as sort of like a being sort of like the big structure that's behind the language. I think it's rare that you hear French teachers talking about vocabulary having that role. And interestingly, I would have said a few years ago that grammar was not even a few years ago. I think if you asked me 6 months ago, I would have been saying, now grammar is absolutely the route in, and it is a very structured route, and it sort of like feels very, very logical, but it's lots of big concepts in there, and it's sometimes difficult to find ways to apply those. And now I've moved my position completely, and I now see the building being made out of vocabulary, and that grammar has a really important role. But it's you're led into grammar through vocabulary, not the other way around. So what's that mean if you learn at the French room? Well, once you're inside the French room, then challenge 907 or just 907 if you want to call that helps you explore powerful words one by one, and so instead of making this big collection of vocabulary, you start to notice them appear into little by little into hidden structure of the language, and that will start to reveal itself over a fairly short period of time. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope to see you in the next tutorial where I'll tell you a little bit more about this approach.